Hey everybody, I saw a whole bunch of movies from Fantasia Festival this year. It was on the internet, it was virtual. I did not go to Montreal. COVID's a thing still, and if I'm able to do it from my house, then that's convenient. Now, I wasn't able to catch everything I wanted to. There were a lot of movies, and they all take time to watch, but I did get to see a decent amount, and it was a good festival overall. Now, I typically review 2 or 3 films per video, but for this one, I'm just gonna change things up and review all of them. So, in no particular order, let's start with Little Vampire from one of the directors of The Rabbi's Cat. This is an animated French film based off of a comic book that was actually created by the director. The film has great music, great animation, and a good sense of humor. Now, this is aiming for a bit younger of an audience than The Rabbi's Cat, but for the most part, this film avoids feeling stupid by just not taking itself too seriously. Whenever there's a mild logical issue or convenience, the film seems aware of it and plays into its absurdity. The villain's motivations are incredibly flimsy, but the characters in the film actively make fun of him for that. There are also narrative cliches that I would usually find irritating, but in this film I was like, yeah, this is exactly what a kid would do here. My biggest issue with the film is that the third act doesn't really live up to the rest of it. There's a large fight/adventure sequence that plays itself pretty seriously, and the entire time I was feeling that it was lacking creativity and satisfaction. It doesn't ruin the film, I guess, but the third act definitely could have been more interesting and exciting. There's also one scene that I felt harmed the believability of the main character's goals and desires, so yeah, this isn't exactly a perfect film. Either way, this is a really cute and fun film that is delightfully weird at points. There are some scenes in this film that would probably be a bit too frightening for super young kids, so I don't know, 8, 10, around that age should be fine, and up, I guess. Anyway, if this seems interesting to you, then go check it out. Also, The Rabbi's Cat is a movie that I enjoyed, and I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. It's closer to a 6 than an 8. Another film I saw was Hayop, the Nimfa Dimaano story. This is an animated Filipino film featuring anthropomorphic animal characters, and it is a very horny film. It is apparently also already out on Netflix in the Philippines. This is definitely more of an adult animation, and this is about a cat woman who's trying to decide between 2 muscly dog men. It is intentionally raunchy and sexual throughout. I wasn't quite sold on the animation style in the trailer, but it works well for the film, and it's pretty easy to get used to. Oh yeah, I should also mention that this film is otherwise known as You Animal. Anyway, this movie's fine. The plot doesn't always make sense. It is engaging at points, but not always. I didn't find the humor in this film to be hilarious, but it was consistently chuckle-worthy throughout. The best part about this film to me is honestly the absurd amount of animal puns that they created. Every scene in this film has plenty of background parody, brand, or business signage. Like, oh, it says Pupsy instead of Pepsi. There was also Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. There are so many puns in this movie that are just purely a part of background visuals, and that alone is pretty amusing. However, it unfortunately doesn't fully make up for the story. In terms of sequence of events, it feels mostly pointless. The main character is pretty unlikable, and she doesn't really have much of a resolution or arc. There are also a few jokes in this film that felt relatively uninspired with obvious gag reveals. Still, this film does have some charm, and it is an easy watch, albeit passively. If you want to put something on in the background while you're cleaning your room or assembling furniture or something, this is not a bad choice. Anyway, I thought this film was alright, so if this sounds interesting to you, then check it out. I can't decide between a 5 or a 6, so I guess I'll just be nice and give it a 6 out of 10. It's closer to a 5 than a 7. Another film I watched was Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes. This is a single-take film about a man who sees images from himself that he records 2 minutes into the future. Someone described it as One Cut of the Dead meets Tenet, so obviously I had to check this one out, and I gotta say that I was pretty disappointed. They essentially just keep walking back and forth to the same 2 locations over and over and over, and the gimmick of the film didn't really seem all that special or complicated. The novelty honestly wore off pretty fast. It's advertised as a comedy, but I didn't find anything funny. Perhaps if I saw this with an audience, then my experience would have been slightly different, I don't know. This is a movie where I actually feel like the inclusion of music would have helped it out dramatically, because as it is right now, it doesn't really feel like it even has a tone. Perhaps if there were some sarcastic or ironic action music or something, then maybe it would give me the impression that this film is aware of how unimpressive it is. As it is right now, it almost feels like we're supposed to be surprised or impressed or entertained every time they go back to the TV screen and it's like, whoa, there's 2 minutes in the future again. Whoa, how'd they do that? It's so crazy. Like, yeah, they just recorded it beforehand. There are so many opportunities to do something impressive with the concepts, but it seems like they just took the laziest route possible. And yeah, I get it, it's obviously low budget, but either they should have secured more funding to make this a more ambitious project, or they should have just made it a short film instead, because hoo boy did this ever drag on. At about 25 minutes through, I skipped through the rest of the film to affirm that yes, they just do the same thing over and over again for the whole movie. And since I mentioned One Cut of the Dead, I should also mention that that is a great movie that you should all see. Don't look up anything about it, the only thing you need to know is that it's a single-take zombie film and that you're supposed to keep watching past the credits. As for Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes, I'm giving this one a 2 out of 10, and I decided to do that number because the number 2 is in the title. Haha, got him. Another film I saw was Satoshi Kon, the Illusionist. This is a documentary about the works of Satoshi Kon, who directed films like Paprika and Perfect Blue. It was a very solid and informative documentary, and as someone who hasn't seen his full catalog, I will say that there were parts that were kind of spoilery. I've already forgotten the specifics of those parts, so it's not really a big deal for me, but perhaps if you want to check out his full catalog before watching this documentary, that would probably be a good idea. This film is very digestible and accessible, but it's also very personal and genuine. The film interviews admirers of his work, but also people that worked closely with him. I feel like this documentary will help me appreciate my second watches for Paprika and Perfect Blue in the future, and I'm looking forward to checking out the rest of Satoshi Kon's work. Anyway, if this looks interesting to you, then check it out, and I'm gonna give this one a 7 out of 10. Another film I saw was Digital Video Editing with Adobe Premiere Pro, the real-world guide to setup and workflow. This is a 40-minute long South Korean horror comedy film that immediately intrigued me from the title, and quite honestly, this was probably the highlight of the festival for me. The majority of the film is through the perspective of the main character's computer screen, and they're trying to edit a film that fixes the shots that are ruined by ghosts appearing in them. It's really funny, and honestly, there are some scary moments too. The film does have jump scares, but as far as I'm concerned, there are good excuses for them. I love the commentary of the characters criticizing the film as they're editing it. It's super fun and meta, and I had an absolute blast watching it. Now, there are a couple moments towards the end that were not as good as they could have been, and there is one gag/editing choice in the film that I found to be super unnecessary and distracting and completely took me out of the film. But aside from those moments, this film was a blast to watch. It is both creepy and hilarious at the same time, and I absolutely loved it. Anyway, check this one out whenever, I guess. I don't know if it's getting released in any way. It's got a letterboxd, but no IMDb. Maybe someone should fix that. I don't know how to do that. Anyway, I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. It's closer to an 8 than a 6. Another film I saw was Alien on Stage, and it was decent. This is a documentary about an amateur theater production of Ridley Scott's Alien. This film is set in the village of Dorset, United Kingdom, and the stakes are raised when they manage to book a show in London's famous West End theater for one night only. This documentary is a very light and easy watch, and there's plenty of good personality coming from the characters organizing and performing in the production, but my biggest problem is that it's just another one of those documentaries that feels really stretched out. When you're filming a documentary, you're more or less constrained to what's happening in real life, and because of this, many documentaries sacrifice having better pacing in exchange for releasing an hour-and-a-half long feature-length film. This is another one to add to the pile of films that would have worked much better as a short. Still, there's no sequence in this film that is devoid of at least amusing moments, but it really feels like it should have been trimmed down more appropriately overall. When they wound up showing the stage performance, I got a good amount of enjoyment from watching how they recreated certain scenes from Ridley Scott's Alien. Some of it was amusing, and some of it was actually pretty impressively creative. Overall, I would recommend this movie, even if at the end of the day I feel like it should have been a 35-minute long YouTube video or something. I don't regret watching it, but I will also never see it again. So check this one out if you want, and I'm giving this one a 5 out of 10. 10. It's closer to a 6 than a 4. Another film I saw was Junkhead. This is a Japanese feature-length stop-motion animated film, and it was created mostly by one person over the course of 7 years, and the director who animated the film is supposedly self-taught as well. Suffice it to say, this is quite the achievement in filmmaking. It is a very weird post-apocalyptic movie with great concepts and character design. It has a great tone and personality. The music is very nostalgic and kind of feels like a 90s techno-industrial sound. Some of the animation feels a little janky here and there, but overall it looks really cool. There are some impressive sets and creative shots and swooping camera movements. You can really tell that there was a lot of love put into this film. Now, what screened at this year's festival actually seems to be a recut of the film that was released in 2017. Perhaps they didn't get the reception they were hoping for, so they changed the runtime from an hour and 55 minutes to an hour and 41 minutes. Honestly, I wouldn't mind if they trimmed out even more, because the first half of the film does feel a bit repetitive and meandering. If this film were an hour and 20 to an hour and a half, I think that would be the perfect length for what this is. Story-wise, it does kind of repeat the same formula over and over. Run around, introduce a new creature thing, fall, repeat. The narrative excuses for what the film is showing are not that great, but what they do show is at least consistently interesting. I feel like the project as a whole would function much better with a more cohesive plot, because in its current state, it doesn't really feel like there's a lot of stakes in the film. At times, it feels more or less like watching an interesting art show rather than an actual narrative with characters we're supposed to care about. It does start to feel more cohesive as it moves along, but that first half of the film definitely could use some more trimming. For much of the film, I was watching it somewhat passively, but it is still enjoyable nonetheless. It's delightfully weird and undeniably charming. It's got a very impressive scale for what it is, and as it goes along, there are some very satisfying fight sequences and payoffs. It even managed to surprise me with some genuine emotional moments near the end. So yeah, definitely check this one out whenever you can, because it honestly deserves an audience. Perhaps there will be an even shorter cut in the future, because right now I'm confused as to how the director found all of those scenes to be necessary. Either way, this film was definitely worth watching, and I will be seeing it again. And I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. Another film I saw was Frank and Zed. This is a feature-length horror puppet film from Puppet Core. At the beginning of the film, they actually play a short film they created called Shine from 2011. And that short film is honestly really great. It's free to watch here on YouTube if you're interested. It's simple, it's to the point, it's creepy and hilarious and disturbing. It's creative, it's well presented. It's a really great short film. Now, unfortunately, the feature-length film that followed was really boring. It is still well presented visually, and there's a lot of impressive stuff going on with puppetry and gore, but man, did they ever overcomplicate things. I get that they were being ambitious and they wanted to tell a full story, but the story is just so boring. There's so much dialogue and it's so uninteresting, and especially with a film that markets itself as being a gory puppet horror film, it feels like I'm spending the entire movie just waiting for the climax. Like, yeah, it's obvious it's building up to something and that eventually there'll be some fun puppet gore stuff, but it really did not seem worth it at all to sit through the entire film to get there. There are no interesting characters, there are many attempts at comedy that do not work, the dialogue is just not great, the lip syncing just feels really off. Again, there's a lot to appreciate about this movie with the art design and the puppetry and the gore, but most of the movie is just shitty dialogue and an overbearing implication that I'm supposed to care about anything going on when there's nothing interesting happening. If there was just better writing, this film could be pretty good. At about 35 minutes into it, which honestly felt like an hour, I skipped until the last third of the film where things were actually happening. And yeah, there was a lot of action and gore, and they clearly were not skimping out on it, but at the same time, the novelty kind of wears off after a while. It all just felt really mindless and purposeless. It's honestly just way too long for what it is. I feel like a gory horror puppet film still could work really well if it just had a better story and better dialogue. So hopefully they find a way to incorporate that in the future, because honestly, I would not mind seeing something like that. Anyway, check out their short film. It was pretty great, and yeah, I guess if this movie looks interesting to you and you can suffer through the terrible story and dialogue, then check this one out also, I guess. I don't know. And I'm giving this one a 5 out of 10. Maybe it should be lower, but I didn't really watch half the movie, so whatever. Fuck it. Another film I saw was We're All Going to the World's Fair. This was a super indie movie, and it's kind of a horror movie, but it's more of a drama. Much of the film is found footage style, but not in ways where it feels like it's disrespecting the audience. They definitely utilized the medium properly, and there's some interesting one-ers and solid practical effects. The presentation and personality of this film really help it stand out as a competent indie film. There are very genuine-feeling dialogue scenes and performances. It's got great editing and plenty of charm, although I do have to admit that there were a couple points that felt a little pretentious. The film has good sound design overall, but there are some parts where it sounds a bit distractingly unrealistic. And my biggest problem is that by the end of the film, it almost feels kind of pointless. I enjoyed much of this film, but it does feel weirdly unsatisfying by the end of it. Either way, I don't regret watching it, and I would recommend it. So check this one out whenever you can, and I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. Another film I saw was The Spine of Night. This film advertises itself as an animated, ultra-violent, epic fantasy film, and I've gotta say that it definitely fulfills its promise of violence. This is a really weird movie, partially in a good way and partially not. Now, the tone of this film is very much attempting a serious epic fantasy, which makes other elements of this film really confusing. The voice cast and voice acting sound like they would more appropriately belong in a television comedy special. For a while I was thinking, this character just sounds like Patton Oswalt, and then I looked it up and it was actually Patton Oswalt. And I get that this is fantasy, but nobody had consistent accents. Like, it was one big mishmash that made the universe more confusing. The animation style is certainly cool and interesting, but especially during many of the action sequences, it felt weirdly slow and clunky. I guess a good amount of this was rotoscoped, probably? I'm not sure, because otherwise I don't know why the action movement would feel so weirdly slow for much of the film. Quite honestly, much of this film felt like I was watching a Joel Haver animation.
Eek! A giant! You must be guarding this entire valley!
Guarding what?
The valley, behind you.
No.
Good channel, by the way, check it out. And yeah, especially with the acting, because it didn't really feel like some of them were even trying to give serious performances. Like, why is Patton Oswalt in this movie? Come on. The soundtrack in this film felt incredibly cheap, like something you'd only hear relegated to the background of an old video game. Later in the film, the soundtrack starts to sound much better, and then starts to feel cheap again. Either way, this movie was undeniably ambitious, and it does still manage to feel pretty cinematic at points. The violence was pretty visceral and well worth the experience. There were a lot of really cool and interesting things happening visually and conceptually, and although this film never managed to make me care about why things were happening, a lot of the things that were happening were pretty cool. So yeah, I would actually recommend this film. It is definitely unique. So check this one out when it gets released on digital on October 29th, apparently. And I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. Another film I saw was You Can't Kill Meme. I saw the title and thought, what the hell is this? And saw the trailer and thought, wow, this looks like shit, and decided to watch it. And yep, it was awful. There was a really great documentary about Pepe the Frog called Feels Good Man, and this movie feels like it's kind of trying to be like that, except it doesn't have a point. It also feels incredibly dated. Like, whoever made this still thinks that advice animals are like the hottest meme right now. Most of this documentary is actually about something that they call meme magic. Like, memes are tarot cards or something, and you can control reality through memes. I don't really know. The subjects being interviewed for this documentary are all completely irrelevant people, but this film pretends as though they aren't. Like, they'll just credit people in the interviews as meme magicians, and they just say shit like, when I make a meme, it happens in real life. But then you try looking them up and they've got like 500 followers, so clearly they weren't making that much of an impact with their meme magic. I shit you not, one of the interviewees for this documentary is the director's friend's roommate. That is not a joke. One of the interviews takes place at a bus stop for some reason, so the audio sucks the entire time. This film is not very efficient with its time, and it doesn't really have anything to say. There's a part where someone is unironically talking about dark spirits and entities walking around Las Vegas. There's a part where there's a crazy lady just showing videos of her cat, saying that the cat was trying to protect her from some sort of supernatural being that people can't see. Really, the only interesting thing about this documentary is just how fucking fucking crazy everyone is. And I wish that I could say that this was done with complete self-awareness, but something gives me the impression that it wasn't. The documentary itself winds up either oversimplifying or overcomplicating the subjects it's talking about. I shit you not, one of the lines from the narration is, Pepe/Kek is 4chan's hyper sigil, and they go on to claim that Kek started with Donald Trump being posted about in poll. That's just literally not true. You're leaving out a lot of information here, which is crazy because the documentary wastes so much time everywhere else. This documentary really reminds me of Room 237, although thankfully absolutely nobody will be watching this one. It is a poorly presented, awful documentary with terrible production value and very unprofessional looking font choices. The editing is cancer, the narration is cancer, it is embarrassingly out of touch with the subject matter it's covering, and yet it held my attention until about 2/3 through it where I was like, okay, I've seen enough. Which is better than I could say about a lot of other movies, I guess. There was some level of entertainment in kind of an exploitative way watching these crazy people be crazy, including the filmmakers, so it's not completely worthless in that sense. This was ass, and I'm giving this one a 2 out of 10. And the last film I saw at Fantasia Festival 2021 was Catch the Fair One. This is a drama thriller about a mixed indigenous former champion boxer who is searching for her missing sister. This is also executive produced by Darren Aronofsky. Much of this film feels very unique, and a good amount of that is due to the main character. Kali Reese does a fantastic job performing her, and it all feels very real in that sense. Rather than just being any run-of-the-mill missing family member thriller, the personality brought by the main character adds a lot to the experience, and it also turns this film into a bit of a political piece touching on missing indigenous women. I really love everything this film set up, and for the entire first act I was completely into it. However, as the film goes on, the formulated and cliched and tropey skeleton starts to reveal itself, and it doesn't ruin the film, but damn, this could have been so much better. If you've seen other films in this genre, you're bound to find plot points and conveniences that may irritate you. It definitely starts to feel a lot more stereotypical as it goes on, which is kind of a waste because of how genuine and unique the initial setup felt. Still, it's not a complete loss, as there are plenty of disturbing and satisfying moments as it goes on. There's plenty of cheese in this film, but there's also plenty of rawness that does not hold back. And putting all that aside, it's still a very professional looking and well-made film. There are some good long takes, there are some great performances. It was a very enjoyable movie overall that, despite some parts feeling very stupid, kept me engaged the entire time. So yeah, check this one out whenever you can, and I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. Alright, that's it for my Fantasia Festival 2021 reviews. I have no idea if I'm gonna do all of my Toronto Film Festival videos in one big review. Maybe I'll do it in a couple, maybe I'll do it just like 3 movies per video like I've always done or something. I don't know. I'm gonna figure it out as I go along. I still need to record those. But for now, I've got a cold and I'm gonna get some rest. Thank you, bye-bye.
It's gonna be longer than a minute. Trust me.
You're a creepy little fuck.
Hi there. Gabe's your brother,
Holy
right?
shit.
I'm Ethan. Charlotte's my mom.
Oh my god.
Hi, Ethan. I'm Alex.